Hello, welcome to episode 108 of the Happy Baby Show. Today's episode is dedicated to talking about some of the big things that you're going to experience in your baby's first 12 months. Now, this is not an exhaustive list, but this is a summary of some of those big things that I both have experienced personally and the things that I support families with inside the Happy Baby Code community, because I know the big things that can impact your parenting experience and the way that your baby is settled, their happiness, all of those things through, as I said, the things that I've seen with my three and the things that I'm helping troubleshoot inside the community. So let's dive in. So the first of those is establishing breastfeeding or bottle feeding. So regardless of the way you feed your baby, when you are first starting out, whether it's your first, your fourth, or whatever, it's a new baby, and with that comes new challenges. So I know from a personal experience, I've had three very different feeding experiences. So my first son, incredibly difficult, despite my knowledge as a midwife, a maternal and child health nurse, incredibly challenging. And that was because there was things going on for Max that I wasn't aware of, that wasn't brought to my attention, and that really made our feeding very, very challenging. We did get there, and I am going to have a podcast episode dedicated to my feeding experiences in time, so make sure to subscribe to the podcast. But that was definitely, there was that huge, probably 3 to 4 month period in establishing breastfeeding with him. With my second son, smooth sailing. I was one of those lucky few where it was literally just a matter of him attaching, and, we never really had a lot of challenges beyond that. And then third time around with Georgie, it was a really hard, I would say, initially first couple of weeks. So, for any family, you're looking at establishing feeding, particularly breastfeeding, that within those first 6 to 12 weeks, that's where your dedication should lie, is making sure that you're getting the hang of feeding, getting positioning right, whether you're bottle feeding or breastfeeding, getting attachment to both the bottle or the breast spot on. And it's going to lead me into my second point when I get there, but getting that attachment and positioning right, no matter how you're feeding, is so important because it really does have a flow-on effect. So that's going to be the first thing that you're going to be experiencing and establishing in your baby's first 12 months. My second point, you're going to need at some point to support your windy or refluxy baby. Now, this doesn't mean that you've got a baby that has, severe reflux. For some of you, you very well may, and you might not have a baby that's, windy to the point of that colic where it's more problematic. They're spending a lot of their days unsettled. Consider it like a spectrum. It's like every single baby will experience some sort of wind because that's just part and parcel of the digestive system. Even some babies will have some level of spitting up, we talk about it as positing as opposed to that more, abnormal reflux where potentially it's actually leading to poor weight gain and, unsettledness and other things like that. So if you consider it a spectrum, every single baby's going to fall upon that somewhere. And so every single parent is going to at some point need to help to support that windy baby. And it could be things like adjusting that attachment, making sure that it is right, no matter if you're breastfeeding or bottle feeding. For other families, it's going to be exploring other causes of why you have a really windy baby or a really refluxy baby. Because at the end of the day, wind and reflux is a symptom. It's a symptom of something that's going on. So it's not just something that you have to go, they'll grow out of it. And I will say for babies who are on the lesser end of the spectrum, it is something they do grow out of as their digestive system matures. But when you're sort of inching towards that more abnormal, then there's definitely things that can contribute to that. And that's something that we talk about inside the community a lot, is let's look at this as a symptom rather than it being, all right, I just need to deal with my baby being windy or refluxy, when it's having such a huge impact on your mental and physical health as well as your baby's physical health. So number 3, both you and your babe's 4th trimester. So it doesn't matter if this is your first baby or your third or wherever it is in line. We all have a baby who is in their 4th trimester in those first 3 months. And it's your 4th trimester too. So it's about shifting this, perception of, okay, our baby's here and it's back to normal life. It's like realizing that for both of you, it's getting to know your new baby because, as I said, this might be your first baby or it might be your third. It doesn't matter. They are a new baby and it's a new little person to get to know. And it's also about stepping into your new role as a mum or dad. Now, whether that is as first-time parents or whether that's now trying to find your feet with a family of 4 or a family of 5 or a family of 6, however many babies you are having. So it's all about, in this time period, you've got a new baby who's earthside, but still very much requires what they had in utero. And I've done a podcast episode on the 4th trimester that I'd love for you to go back and check out. And with the 4th trimester, when you've got a baby who's so used to the intrauterine environment, so basically they didn't have to demand food. They didn't have to regulate temperature. They didn't have to, they would fall asleep and be rocked to sleep when they needed to sleep in utero. All of these things were just happening without you needing to do anything. And now it's very much us required to read their cues and to know when to put them down and to know when to feed them. And when regardless of if we're hitting the mark or not with those things, every single baby to some degree, again, it's kind of like a spectrum, all depending on temperament and sensitivity to the world, but there's going to be some crying, and usually that crying is related to overstimulation because the world is just overstimulating for a new baby. And again, as I mentioned, a huge part of this is temperament and sensitivity with your baby. But every family is going to experience that adjustment with the 4th trimester and supporting our newborns to get the hang of being in this outside world. Number 4, maturation in sleep cycles that mark the 4-month sleep regression. Now, I'm doing bunny ears at the moment, but I want to talk about the 4-month sleep regression as it's best known because that is what families know about these sleep changes that happen at the 4-month sleep regression. Now, the reason why this is a big one is because at the end of the day, all babies will go through this maturation of sleep cycles. It happens somewhere between 3 and 5 months, 4 months being the average, which is why it's called the 4-month sleep regression. It's a part of their normal development. So first of all, normalizing this maturation sleep cycles is so important because then we realize that yes, every single baby does go through these sleep changes because it's an awesome part of their development. Now, I've done a whole episode on the 4-month sleep regression that teaches you what it's all about. But in a nutshell, your baby will begin doing complete sleep cycles, and which will see them cycle from awake to light sleep to deep sleep, back into light sleep, and then back to awake, roughly every an hour and a half to 2 hours. So they're not quite the length of an adult sleep cycle, but they are starting to look more like our sleep cycles because that's what we do as well. So this can see your baby starting to wake every 2 hours and needing a hand to go back to sleep. If they've come to awake and they can't get themselves back into that sleep cycle, they're going to be crying out and needing a bit of a hand. Now, for some families, you might not even notice this. Or for other families, it might just be this short-lived disruption. You notice that they're all of a sudden waking every 2 hours, but then it settles down. There is no way of knowing where you're going to fall in this because at the end of the day, it probably comes down to your baby's temperament and also what sort of sleep foundations you have set up prior to these sleep changes happening. For others, it becomes the tone for the wake-ins ongoing. So it becomes a little bit more chronic. And many families will say, oh, my baby slept so well before the 4-month, sleep regression hit. And then all of a sudden, they've gone from having these beautiful long stints of sleep to actually waking more than they did as a newborn. So usually there is that, what's required is assessing that overall day's sleep and having a look at how you are settling your baby back to sleep during that period. Because chances are, if your baby was actually consolidating longer stints of sleep prior to these changes, then they're not suddenly waking starving every 2 hours. But, I mean, there is so much around this, and, I'm going to be diving deeper into so many topics that relate to the things that come up at the 4-month sleep regression in coming episodes. So stay tuned, but yes, the maturation in sleep cycles is a big one that parents will experience in their baby's first 12 months. Number 5, catnapping. So catnapping is a cause of a lot of pain for families because it is really challenging. It is really frustrating when you feel like you're spending your whole day settling or resettling, and or even just not knowing. Even if you decide to just let your baby have those small naps, that you might move on with your day, but it doesn't mean that they're not tired or that you're noticing that they're a bit more cranky, and also knowing how to adjust the day and all of the things. So until around 4 to 5 months, catnapping does have a huge developmental influence. There is a certain amount that's inside of our control when it comes to catnapping. So if you think about catnapping, there's elements that are in our control, and then there's elements that are outside of our control. That's that developmental piece. So regardless of whether it's in either part, catnapping provides to be problematic if you have a tired and cranky baby. So it doesn't matter if, what the cause of that catnapping is, whether it's inside your control or outside of your control. At the end of the day, if you have a tired and cranky baby, then that can be really challenging for you. It also leaves you wondering whether you need to resettle or get them up, when to put them down again for a sleep, when to feed, and how to entertain a baby who clearly hasn't had enough sleep. And that's where the challenges of catnapping does arise. So it is something that most families experience, and I would say that that's why I wanted to talk about it in this episode, because it definitely marks one of the 10 things you'll likely experience in your baby's first 12 months. Number 6, introducing foods. Now, I know from within the Happy Baby Code community that there is so many questions asked about the introduction of foods. And it's not just your common, like, what foods do we start first? How do we move from like more of a puree based into more finger foods? Do we do baby-led weaning, or do we do a more, there's so many questions that come up around food because it can be really daunting. The other questions that come up is lots of reflections from family inside the community saying, hey, did anyone notice that when you started food, sleep started to change? Because this is how food can present. It can present in more than just the technical parts of baby-led weaning versus that more traditional form, what foods to introduce. It can be also that influence of how is this impacting the rest of our baby? Has anyone noticed that breastfeeds or formula feeds have reduced? Is that normal? Has anyone noticed that my baby is suddenly waking a lot more after they've started food? So this is all stuff that not everyone's going to have these same questions. A lot of families will feel more confident than others, but I know from my experience of answering questions inside the Happy Baby Code community that it's definitely something that you'll experience to some degree in your baby's first 12 months. Number 7, early rising. Now, I hope that you don't experience this in your baby's first 12 months, but the reason I brought it in was because it's definitely something that happens. I see it happening a lot during periods of nap transitions, which I'm going to talk about later. But when our babies are transitioning through naps, so when I talk about that, it's when they are going, say, from 4 naps to 3 naps, 3 naps to 2 naps, 2 naps to 1 nap, 1 nap to no naps. It can be a really tricky time because if we're not getting the balance in our baby or toddler's sleep needs right, it can lead to early rising. But that, of course, is just one of the elements of what can cause early rising. So when I talk about early rising, it's wake-ins before 6 a.m. on a chronic basis. So if your baby wakes up before 6 a.m., and this is based on, say, a 7 to 7 sort of bedtime. It does change depending on when your baby goes to bed and when they usually wake up in the morning. But if you put your baby to bed around 7 and they're always waking up at 5:30, what families tend to notice is, first of all, that's a really early start to the day for you. And usually our babies also, it's too early for them too. They weren't quite finished that nighttime sleep, and it can set the tone for the day. You've got a tired or overtired baby from the get-go. So early rising can be experienced at various times due to various reasons. But yes, that is something that you may experience in your baby's first 12 months. Number 8, the impact of big developmental milestones on sleep. Now, there is so much that happens in our baby's first 4 years. Now, I'm going to focus on some of the big developmental changes that can impact our baby's sleep in the first 12 months because that's a focus of this episode. But throughout the first 4 years, there is so much brain development and change. So it's definitely not, it doesn't stop at 12 months, but some of the big things that you may notice really starts to play out in a sleep world is rolling and the impact it can have on sleep. Moving to arms out of swaddle, so when your baby's contained in their swaddle or their sleeping bag, and then you have to move to arms out. Standing and sleep, when your baby learns to stand or crawl or sit, and the impact that that can have when it comes to sleep. And object permanence and sleep. Now, I have done an episode on object permanence. I will link to that into the show notes. I'm sure I have. I might be mixing it up with an episode, a lesson I've done inside the membership, but I'm going to go back and double check that and link to that in the show notes if I have in fact done a episode on object permanence and sleep. If I have not, then that's something I'll talk about in future episodes. But they're just some of the big developmental changes that can happen, that do happen. It's not about can. Your baby will develop these skills. They will learn how to roll. They will need to go arms out of swaddle. They will learn to stand, crawl, and sit. And they will go through object permanence. Now, does that mean it's going to wreak havoc on your baby's sleep? No, it doesn't. But it can. It can when our babies are going through these, big developmental changes. Because every baby's going to be a little bit different. And yeah, they're just important things to note. That you can keep in the back of your mind, and know that if you're going through those, that you're not alone. Number 9, nap and bedtime resistance. So your baby's sleep needs change roughly every 4 to 6 weeks. Then eventually around every 6 to 8 weeks when they get through their first 12 months of life. So this is why, if you've ever felt like you've hit your groove in your routine and then all of a sudden you feel like sleep is a fight. So this is because sleep needs are frequently changing. Like if you break that down, roughly every month or to 6 weeks, sleep needs are changing. So you need to be armed with the knowledge on how to know when your babe's sleep needs have changed. You need to know how to know when to adjust things and how to adjust that sleep need so your baby's getting enough sleep, but that you're keeping up with, the changing sleep needs that do happen within those first 12 months of life. And number 10, nap transitions. So I referred to these before. So as I mentioned, there's nap transitions at 4 to 3, which happens around 3 to 4 months. As your baby gets older, you'll notice then that there's a 3 to 2 nap transition. This happens somewhere between 7 to 9 months. We go from 2 to 1 naps around 16 to 18 months, and then 1 to 0 naps is your 2 to 3 years sort of age group. So I obviously won't talk about those older baby ones because the focus of this is the first 12 months. But as your baby gets older, they tend to get a little bit trickier. The nap transitions can feel harder for you. So for example, the 7 to 9 month nap transition can feel really hard. It can be a real balance of going between 3 naps to 2 naps. Like, some days your baby, can't speak today, may only need to have 2 naps. Other days they may need 3. And that's where early rising can, play a part in that. If your baby wakes at 5:30, it's probably not going to be a 2 nap day, and it can feel really tricky for parents to navigate. So there we have it. That is a list of 10 of the big things. So like I said, it's not a comprehensive list. There's so much other things that are happening in that first 12 months of life that I haven't touched upon. But in terms of the things that you may experience with your baby, they are my top 10 based on my personal experience and what I'm supporting families with inside the Happy Baby Code community. Now, if you would love to be prepared and empowered rather than just winging it through all of these, big changes that happen, crossing your fingers and hoping it doesn't rock the boat in your family too much, when it comes to all of these changes that you're experiencing, then check out my membership, the Happy Baby Code, before the end of the week. So the 22nd of May, enrollment is open. You can join us inside the membership prior to Sunday, the 22nd of May. So the Happy Baby Code membership is designed to allow you to confidently navigate all of the feeding, sleep, health and development changes that inevitably occur in not just your baby's first year of life, but your baby and toddler's first 3 years of life. So you can parent confidently and intuitively, which is going to allow you to thrive in parenthood rather than just survive, which I feel like is the mode that some families are just defaulting to, whether you mean to or not. So if you do want to learn more about the membership before enrollment closes on Sunday, head to www.jenniferbutler.online/thehappybabykode. That's all one word. And if you're listening outside the enrollment period, Enrollment to the membership is only open a few times a year. So if you go to that link after enrollment has closed, you'll be able to pop your name on the wait list so you are one of the first to know when enrollment reopens. I hope you've enjoyed today's episode and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.